It started with a smirk, one of those slow, deliberate ones that didn't need a punchline to be insulting. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed confidently, as if the debate stage belonged to him and only him. The Fox News special was live, broadcasting to millions. Across from him sat Ibrahim Traoré, calm but unreadable, his eyes focused like a scalpel. "This guy," Trump scoffed, pointing a thumb at Traoré, "he's not a leader. He's just another rebel who got lucky with a microphone and a few angry speeches. You don't build nations on emotion, you build them with power." The crowd murmured, some laughed, others tensed. Traoré didn't flinch. Trump continued, voice rising like a performer craving a standing ovation. "You talk about revolution like it's some romantic movie. But here in the real world, in America, we set the standard. We make the rules. You're not a revolution. You're a noise." And that was it. Traoré slowly leaned toward his mic, his voice low, steady, and razor-sharp. "You think I'm noise because I don't echo your system, because I wasn't born into applause. But let me tell you something, Mr. Trump, revolution doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't need your playbook. I don't follow your rules." He paused, then added with piercing weight, "because I wrote new ones." The studio froze. Trump's smile faded just slightly. Traoré wasn't done. "You call me a rebel. I accept. Because rebels shake thrones that pretend to be eternal. And this," he gestured to the room, the cameras, the polished stage, "this isn't a crown. This is a stage, and I didn't come to perform. I came to dismantle." That's when it shifted. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. A few heads nodded, a few brows furrowed. Trump blinked, just once, but enough for the moment to land. Something new had entered the room, a challenge that didn't care about applause, ratings, or legacies. A revolution, in a tailored suit, speaking in thunder. For a brief moment after Traoré's words, the studio went silent. The type of silence that doesn't wait to be filled, one that holds weight. Even the moderator, a seasoned political host with years of live television experience, hesitated. Her hand hovered over the cue cards like they'd suddenly become irrelevant. Trump shifted in his seat. He wasn't used to being hit with silence. He was used to roars, cheers, boos, anything loud. But this quiet unnerved him. "You done?" he finally asked, his voice flatter now. "Because let me be clear, you don't rewrite rules in a world you didn't build." Traoré looked at him, unmoved. "That's exactly why I rewrite them." The crowd reacted, not with cheers or jeers, but something in between. Murmurs. Interest. The kind of reaction that couldn't be spun. Trump tried to steer the momentum back. "You think this is some fantasy game of power? Let me remind you, America holds the cards. We've held them for a century. We fund, we arm, we decide." Traoré leaned in, voice cold and calm. "Then maybe it's time someone reshuffles the deck." The camera caught Trump's nostrils flaring, the tightening in his jaw. A flicker of tension rippled through his posture. Traoré wasn't arguing with emotion, he was operating on precision. Calm was his weapon, and the room was starting to feel it. The moderator finally spoke, hoping to regain control. "Gentlemen, let's stay on topic. This segment is about global leadership." Traoré nodded slowly. "Exactly. And leadership isn't inherited. It's earned." He turned to Trump again. "You led with walls and threats. I lead with courage and consequence. One of us fears change, the other is change." That line hit like a drumbeat, sharp, rhythmic, final. On social media, clips of the exchange were already going viral. The comment sections exploded. He dismantled Trump without raising his voice. "This is what real power sounds like." Traoré is a different kind of storm. Something had shifted, not just in the room, but outside it, on every screen. In every living room. The revolution had entered the broadcast. And it didn't knock. The host tried again to reset the room. "Let's focus on diplomacy. President Trump, what would you say to critics who claim America's influence is slipping?" Trump smirked. "We're still the biggest game in town. Everyone wants a seat at our table, even if they pretend they don't." Traoré didn't even wait for a cue. "Some of us are building our own table," he said. "And we're not asking for chairs." That one line shifted the mood like thunder behind a closed door. Trump raised an eyebrow, leaning back with a dismissive shrug. You build with what? Dust and slogans? Let's be real. Without American tech, American weapons, American dollars, you're a slogan, not a structure. Traoré's eyes locked onto him. Calm. Cutting. Without African minerals, African labor, African silence, you're not a superpower. You're a borrower in a stolen suit. The room stiffened. Trump blinked. The moderator didn't dare interrupt. Traoré continued. We die so your smartphones work. Our ground gives you gold, cobalt, lithium. But you sit there and talk like you invented power. You didn't invent anything. You outsourced it. Trump tried to laugh it off, but the tension had become visible, gripping his hands together tighter than before. And now, Traoré went on, we're learning to say no. No to your pity. No to your deals. No to your definitions. He leaned forward just slightly, just enough. You call us rebels. That's because your empire was built on obedience. I'm not here to obey. I'm here to rebuild. It was no longer just a debate. It was a rupture. Commentators on rival channels began cutting to the moment. Tweets popped like fireworks. This isn't just a clapback. It's a global shift. Traoré didn't raise his voice, he raised the stakes. Trump met someone who won't blink. The audience was no longer watching two men argue. They were watching one man redefine the argument. And that was more dangerous than any raised fist. Trump wasn't used to silence, especially not after speaking. And yet, when Traoré finished, the studio wasn't roaring with applause or shaking with outrage. It was simply, listening. That's what unnerved him most. He leaned forward now, both elbows on the table, his voice lower, tighter. You talk like you've got the upper hand, but let me remind you, we still run the board. You've got pride. We've got power. Traoré didn't flinch. Power that can't handle words, he asked. Sounds fragile. Trump's brow furrowed. You think this is a game? You really believe one man like you can stop the machine we built? Traoré's answer came like a drumbeat. Not stop it. Outgrow it. The host looked caught between awe and panic. The control room's producers were frantically debating whether to go to commercial, but nobody moved. Cameras stayed locked. Trump's smile reappeared, but it was thinner now. Less confidence. More calculation. Careful, he warned. You're walking a fine line. Traoré didn't miss a beat. You say line like it's a threat. But I walk lines every day. Fault lines. Borderlines. Red lines you drew in our sand. He paused, then finished quietly. The difference is, I don't walk them to survive. I walk them to erase them. For the first time, Trump leaned back and said nothing. Not because he had no words. But because he wasn't sure which ones still worked. Across the internet, clips of the exchange were exploding. This is no longer just rhetoric. It's resistance. Traoré talks like a man who's not afraid of collapse, because he's not tied to what might fall. Trump's poker face cracked. That silence said everything. What started as political theater was turning into something else. Not just a clash of egos. A clash of worldviews. The studio lights dimmed slightly for dramatic effect, but neither man noticed. This wasn't a show anymore, it was a standoff. Trump crossed his arms. Let's be honest, he said, his voice booming again. Without America, where would you be? No roads, no medicine, no economy. We built the fire. You just warmed your hands. It was meant to sting. To belittle. But Traoré smiled. A fire built on stolen wood doesn't make you a craftsman, he replied. It makes you a thief. Trump blinked. You didn't build the fire, Traoré continued. You lit it with someone else's match. You used our labor, our minerals, our silence. Then claimed the light as your own. The audience held its breath. Trump leaned forward, fists clenched. You're rewriting history. No, Traoré said calmly. I'm reading it without your edits. The moderator finally intervened. Gentlemen, perhaps we can bring the tone down. No, Traoré interrupted. Let it stay where it is. Because for once, the tone doesn't serve them. Trump raised a finger. You want to talk big? Fine. But all that talk doesn't move markets. Doesn't keep missiles out of the air. Doesn't pay bills. I'm not here to impress stockholders, Traoré said. I'm here to wake up my people. And apparently, a few of yours too. The moderator's eyes darted nervously toward the production team. Phones were buzzing. Hashtags were trending. Traoré was now the most searched name in the US. Some said he was dangerous. Others said he was necessary. And for the first time in the broadcast, Trump's gaze dropped for a half second. Just long enough for people to notice. Trump recovered quickly, but the brief shift in his gaze didn't go unnoticed. The internet had already clipped it, looped it, dissected it. But in the studio, he straightened his tie and pushed back hard. You talk like a preacher, Trump said, voice cool but razor-edged. But leadership isn't about words. It's about results. And your country, what does it have to show? Traoré didn't flinch. We don't measure our worth in skyscrapers or stock prices, he said. We measure it in resilience. In the fact that after everything you threw at us, sanctions, coups, media smears, we're still standing. Trump laughed dismissively. Standing? You're isolated. You're poor. You're small. Small? Traoré raised an eyebrow. Then why are you sweating? The crowd stirred again. Trump gestured to the audience. Because it's theater. You put on a show. I've built empires. You've built headlines. I didn't come here to perform, Traoré said. I came to disrupt. And how's that working out for you? Trump shot back. Traoré leaned in slightly. Better than expected. You see, the game you're playing, power, image, applause, it's dying. We're not trying to win it. We're replacing it. Trump smirked. You can't replace what you don't understand. Traoré smiled. And you can't defend what you never owned. Silence. One that screamed louder than any outburst. Across the globe, millions were watching. Some in disbelief. Some in awe. But all were witnessing something they hadn't seen before, a man not afraid to look the West in the eye and speak as its equal. Not as a guest. Not as a student. But as a rival. Trump crossed his arms, his trademark confidence flickering for just a second. He leaned back in his chair and tried a new tactic, patronizing calm. You're young, Trump said, voice low and deliberate. You'll learn how the world works. Eventually. You'll see that people like me don't lose. We shape the outcome. Traoré blinked once. Then said, "That's your fear talking." Trump chuckled. "Fear? Son, I've negotiated with nuclear powers. You lead a landlocked country barely on the map. And yet here we are," Traoré said, his voice sharp. "On the same stage. Speaking to the same audience. You didn't invite me, I arrived. That's the difference." Trump waved a hand. "You're loud. But the system doesn't move for noise." "No," Traoré said. "It moves for momentum. And that's what we have. People are tired of polished liars. They want raw truth. Even if it's uncomfortable." The moderator tried to interject, but the tension overpowered her cue. Trump pressed forward. "You think you're the future?" "No," Traoré replied. "I think you're the past." A gasp from the audience. "You built a world where power silences truth," Traoré continued. "But now, truth is louder than ever. You used to command. Now you react." Trump narrowed his eyes. "You used to intimidate. Now you defend." The line hit hard. Even some of the studio crew paused. Traoré leaned forward, his voice low but thunderous in tone. "You spent decades building mirrors. We're bringing in the light." For the first time, Trump looked like he was recalculating. And Traoré? He looked like a man who knew that moment was his. Trump shifted in his seat, the grin on his face thinner now, more forced. "You talk a big game. But talk isn't legacy. Talk doesn't build countries." Traoré folded his hands calmly. "You're right. Talk doesn't build. That's why I don't just talk." Trump pounced. "Then tell us what you've built, Traoré. Go ahead. Name one thing." Traoré didn't flinch. "I've built a country that stopped begging." The audience stirred. "I've built a government that listens before it borrows. A military that protects instead of obeys. A people who no longer look overseas to solve their own hunger." Trump shook his head. "That's not power. That's desperation." "No," Traoré replied. "It's independence. Something you forgot exists outside of your flag." Trump's voice rose. "You wouldn't be on this stage without American support. You wouldn't have microphones or satellites or—" Traoré cut in, cool and devastating. "I wouldn't have puppets either." Silence. "You shout," Traoré said, standing now, voice steady as iron, "I build." He turned to the audience. "This is the difference between us. One of us believes power is inherited. The other earns it." Trump stood too. "I earned everything I have." "Then why do you keep shouting to prove it?" The crowd erupted. Even some of Trump's supporters looked shaken. And Traoré, eyes calm, added the last blow. "You inherited applause. I inherited silence. But I made the silence listen." Trump was seething now. The smile was gone. His finger jabbed the air as he barked, "You think this makes you a hero? What you're doing? You're tearing things down." Traoré didn't move. "I'm tearing down what was built on our backs. There's a difference." "You're making enemies," Trump snapped. "I'm making space," Traoré replied, "for my people to stand. To breathe. To stop surviving and start deciding." The moderator stepped in. "Gentlemen, let's." But Trump waved him off. "No, let him talk. Let him pretend he's more than just a moment." Traoré turned fully toward him. "A moment," he said softly. "You're confusing me with a headline. I'm not here for a season. I'm here for a shift." Trump scoffed. "All this pride, but your country still depends on aid." "Because aid," Traoré said, stepping forward, "was designed to create dependence. You don't send help, you send control wrapped in a flag." The studio went still again. "You want obedience," Traoré said, his voice low and deliberate. "I want dignity." "You'll regret that tone," Trump muttered. "I don't speak in tones," Traoré said. "I speak in truths. And truth doesn't beg." Trump tried to respond, but stumbled on his words. And Traoré, without raising his voice, delivered the line that sent shockwaves. "You want the world to stay beneath you. I want mine to stand beside me." Even the cameras seemed to pause. A new silence fell, one not born of fear, but recognition. The world was hearing something it hadn't expected. And it wasn't done yet. As the debate wound down, the air in the studio was electric, not with applause, but with awareness. Trump looked stunned. Not because he'd lost control of the conversation, he was used to noise, confrontation, fire, but because, somehow, this hadn't been fire. It had been stillness. Gravity. Truth with weight. Traoré remained standing tall, unmoved by the studio lights, unshaken by the stage. His hands at his sides, no theatrics, no performance. Just presence. The moderator attempted to summarize the debate. "Tonight, we've witnessed an exchange of ideologies, of global visions. And whatever side you take, this moment will be remembered." But most people weren't listening to the moderator. They were looking at the man who had come without a suit, without an army, without a script, yet had shaken the room with a few simple truths. One by one, the studio audience stood. Not clapping. Just standing. As if acknowledging something bigger than applause. Traoré nodded once. Not a bow, never a bow. A sign of recognition, not surrender. Trump turned away, jaw tight. But in that moment, it was clear. Power didn't always wear a tie. And revolutions didn't always shout. Sometimes, they just stood quietly, and refused to kneel. The camera zoomed out, framing Traoré as he exited the stage. The lights behind him dimmed. And in the silence that followed, millions watching felt something shift. A man had walked in as a guest. He walked out as a reminder. Not every leader waits for permission. Some just lead. This wasn't just a debate. It was a collision, between power and principle. Donald Trump represented the old world, where the loudest voice thinks it rules, and applause is mistaken for respect. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't come to impress. He came to remind. That real leadership doesn't shout. It builds. It stands. It endures. While Trump played to the cameras, Traoré spoke to history. And when he said, "I am the revolution," he didn't need a crowd to believe him. He already had something louder than applause. Conviction. Some chase power. Others define it. Traoré just did.